The year 1803. Thomas Jefferson has just doubled the size of the United States with a stroke of his pen, purchasing 828,000 square miles of unmapped wilderness from Napoleon for $15 million. That's roughly 4 cents an acre, if you're keeping track. But here's what Jefferson didn't know he was buying. He was purchasing a laboratory for human transformation, a place where civilized men would learn to eat like wolves. Now think about this for a moment. These weren't wild men heading west. These were farmers from Kentucky, shopkeepers from Street Louis, men who said grace before meals and used actual forks, men who had never seen a buffalo, never tasted anything more exotic than salt pork, and they were about to enter a world where the rules of civilized eating would die within days. Manuel Lisa, I.S. Long, remember that name, leads the first major commercial expedition up the Missouri River that year. This Spanish-born trader thinks he's organizing a business venture. What he's actually doing is conducting an experiment in human adaptation that would have fascinated Charles Darwin. Lisa watches his carefully recruited men transform from bread-eating Christians into creatures who fight over raw buffalo liver while it's still steaming in the morning cold. Here's the thing that gets me about this transformation. It didn't take months. It took days. John Coulter, who had become legendary as the first white man to see Yellowstone's geysers and hot springs, discovers something profound on that initial trek with Lisa. Survival means learning from grizzly bears. And I mean literally learning from grizzly bears. He watches them tear into rotting elk carcasses and realizes, this is food. This putrid, maggot-infested meat that would make a civilized man vomit. It's calories. It's life. Coulter starts eating like a bear, rotting elk for breakfast. Grasshoppers crunched between his teeth like nature's popcorn. Pine, bark soup that tastes like drinking turpentine but keeps scurvy from rotting his gums. Within weeks, this Kentucky farm boy has rewired his entire digestive system through sheer necessity. But Coulter isn't alone in this transformation. The French voyageurs coming down from Canada bring their own brutal wisdom. They know about pemmican, R. major, that magical mixture of rendered fat, dried meat, and berries that could last years without spoiling. Imagine carrying a food that doesn't rot, doesn't freeze, doesn't attract bears, and contains enough calories to keep you alive for months. That's pemmican, and it tastes like eating seasoned cardboard mixed with grease. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Enter Sacagawea, the Shoshone woman who guided Lewis and Clark. She becomes the bridge between two worlds of eating. She teaches Lewis and Clark's men to identify camas roots, these bulbs that smell like wet dog when you dig them up, but provide crucial starch that prevents the muscle wasting that kills explorers. She shows them which berries won't poison them, which leaves can be chewed to prevent scurvy, and most importantly, which insects taste nutty when roasted, versus those that induce violent vomiting. Think about what's happening here. These men are receiving a crash course in survival cuisine from someone whose people had perfected the art of not starving for thousands of years. The Shoshone didn't just survive in this landscape, they thrived, and their knowledge becomes the difference between life and death for Americans pushing into the unknown. The early years establish what become the first unwritten rules of mountain man culture. Rule number 1, never refuse offered food, no matter how revolting. And I mean never. You might be offered fermented fish guts that smell like death itself, but refusing means losing trading partnerships, territorial access, and potentially your life. Rule number 2, anything that doesn't kill you makes you stronger. The man who can keep down maggoty meat without flinching earns respect. Rule number 3, the man who can eat the most revolting things gets the best trapping territories. It's survival of the strong-stomached. By 1810, something unprecedented has happened in American history. A new breed of human emerges from this wilderness laboratory. Men whose digestive systems have evolved beyond civilization's weakness. Men who see maggots as seasoning, who consider fresh meat almost suspiciously fancy. who can drink water that would hospitalize a city dweller and digest proteins that would poison normal humans. These aren't just tough men. These are men who have fundamentally altered their biology through willpower and necessity. Let me paint you a picture of what this looks like. It's 1809, and a brigade of 12 men has been trapping beaver for 4 months without resupply. They've eaten their horses. They've eaten their leather goods boiled into glue soup. They've eaten wolves, coyotes, ravens, and mice, and they're still functioning, still setting traps, still making business decisions. One of them, let's call him Bill, Chenoleva, because half of them were named Bill, finds a week-old elk carcass that bears have been working on. It's green. It's crawling with larvae. The smell would make a modern person evacuate their stomach from 50 yards away. Bill examines it like a gourmand evaluating fine wine. He cuts away the worst parts, slices off some red meat that's only slightly rotten, and shares it with his partners. They eat it raw, because building a fire might attract hostile Native Americans. And they don't get sick. Their systems have adapted. This is the crucial point that most people miss about the mountain men. This isn't just about toughness or desperation. This is about human evolution happening in real time. These men are literally changing their biology to survive in an environment that should kill them. The transformation goes beyond just eating disgusting things. Their entire relationship with food changes. They stop eating on schedules. They stop expecting variety. They stop distinguishing between breakfast foods and dinner foods, between meat and vegetables, between fresh and spoiled. Food becomes purely functional, fuel for the machine of survival. But here's what's fascinating. They don't just survive this diet. They thrive on it. These men are covering incredible distances on foot, climbing mountains, fighting grizzly bears, and working harder than any human beings in history. And they're doing it on a diet that would horrify a modern nutritionist. Raw buffalo liver provides vitamin A that prevents night blindness. Organ meats supply B vitamins that keep their nervous systems functioning. The fat content of their diet, which would shock modern doctors, provides the concentrated calories needed for Arctic survival. Without knowing anything about nutrition science, they're eating one of the most nutritionally complete diets possible, and the psychological transformation is just as profound as the physical one. These men develop what you might call a philosophical relationship with food. They understand, in a way that civilized people never can, that eating is about survival, not pleasure. That disgust is a luxury they can't afford. That the difference between civilization and barbarism might be nothing more than access to a steady food supply. The mountain men of 1803 to 1810 are creating a new American archetype. The man who laughs at hardship, who finds strength in suffering, who transforms obstacles into advantages. And it all starts with learning to eat like wolves. By 1810, when the first generation of mountain men begins returning to civilization for supplies and trade, they carry with them stories that sound like fiction. Stories of men who drink warm blood like wine, who crack bones to eat the marrow like candy, who fight over buffalo intestines like children fighting over cake. But these aren't tall tales. These are survival techniques that work. These men have discovered something profound about human nature, that we're far more adaptable than civilization teaches us, that the human body and spirit can digest anything if freedom is the reward. And this is just the beginning. The golden age of mountain man cuisine is still ahead, the years when survival eating becomes an art form, when competitive consumption determines social hierarchy, when men perfect recipes for foods that would gag a buzzard and still taste better than captivity. The civilized men who entered the wilderness in 1803 are gone. In their place stand creatures who've learned the wolf's most important lesson. Survival isn't about dignity. It's about eating whatever keeps you alive and asking for seconds. 1820 to 1840. These are the golden years, when mountain man cuisine transforms from desperate necessity into cultural art form, when survival eating becomes a badge of honor, a test of manhood, and ultimately a twisted form of entertainment. Jim Bridger is barely 20 years old when he learns the sacred practice that will define mountain man culture for decades. Picture this kid from Virginia, probably never seen anything wilder than a domestic pig, standing over a freshly killed buffalo with a group of Crow warriors. They're teaching him something that will shock you, but it makes perfect biological sense. They show him how to eat the liver raw, right there, immediately after the kill. Now here's the thing about raw bison liver, and this is going to sound disgusting, but stay with me. It's one of nature's perfect foods, packed with vitamin A, iron, and B vitamins in concentrations that would make a modern supplement company jealous. But you have to eat it fresh, within minutes of the kill, and you have to eat it raw, because cooking destroys half the nutrients. So young Jim Bridger, this Virginia farm boy, learns to slice open a buffalo's belly with his knife, reach inside the steaming carcass, cut out the liver while it's still warm, and eat it like an apple, blood running down his chin, steam rising from the organ in the cold mountain air. The Crow warriors watching to see if this white boy has what it takes to survive in their world. And Bridger discovers something that changes everything. It tastes good. Not just edible, actually good. Rich, metallic. Satisfying in a way that cooked meat never is. Within weeks, he's craving it, looking forward to kills not for the meat, but for those first few bites of warm, bloody liver. This isn't just about nutrition. This is a ritual, a transformation ceremony. The blood running down his chin marks him as a true hunter, a man who's crossed the line from civilized to wild, and his body responds. His night vision improves, his energy levels skyrocket, his immune system strengthens. The Crow warriors nod in approval. This white boy might survive after all. But Bridger isn't the only one perfecting the art of frontier dining. Kit Carson, yeah, that Kit Carson, becomes the undisputed master of beaver tail preparation. And let me tell you, properly prepared beaver tail is like the lobster of the Rocky Mountains. Here's how you do it, according to Carson's own notes. You take a freshly killed beaver, and it has to be fresh, because beaver tail spoils faster than almost any other meat. You build a fire with hardwood, because softwood gives the meat a bitter taste. You hold the tail over the flames until the skin bubbles and peels away like a bad sunburn. What you're left with is meat that tastes like fishy pork and contains enough fat to sustain a man for days in sub-zero temperatures. But here's the crucial part. You don't just eat the meat, you eat everything. The fat renders down into this golden oil that you save for cooking. The bones you crack open for marrow. Even the skin, once it's properly prepared, becomes leather for moccasins or food containers. Nothing gets wasted. Not in a world where the next meal might be 2 weeks away. The legendary 1825 rendezvous on Henry's Fork changes everything. This is where 800 mountain men, native traders, and Mexican merchants gather for the first great trading fair of the American West. And it's where competitive eating becomes a defining feature of mountain man culture. Joe Meek, remember that name, makes a wager that becomes legend. This Missouri kid, barely 23 years old, bets his entire year's earnings. We're talking thousands of dollars in beaver pelts. These beaver pelts that he can consume an entire rattlesnake, including the venomous head. Now think about this crowd. 800 of the toughest men in North America gathered in a circle, watching one kid prepare to eat 6 feet of venomous serpent. These are men who've seen everything, eaten everything, survived everything, and they're horrified. Meek starts with the tail, chews methodically like he's eating jerky, works his way up the body, pausing occasionally to wash down the meat with whiskey. The crowd gets quieter as he approaches the head. This is the dangerous part. Rattlesnake venom won't kill you if you swallow it. Your stomach acid neutralizes it. But if you have any cuts in your mouth, any dental problems, any way for that venom to enter your bloodstream, Meek bites off the head, chews, swallows. The crowd explodes in cheers, horror, and amazement, and Joe Meek has established himself as the ultimate iron belly of the American frontier. But the rendezvous produces more than just spectacular displays of gastronomic courage. It becomes a laboratory for survival cuisine. Jedediah Smith, Onolafai, that Bible-reading explorer who mapped more territory than Lewis and Clark, documents in his journal the precise recipe for what the French voyageurs call boudin. And boudin is, well, it's an acquired taste. You take buffalo intestines and turn them inside out, stuff them with wild onions, partially digested grass from the buffalo's stomach, kidney fat, and blood. Lots of blood. Then you roast the whole thing over a fire until the outside gets crispy, while the inside stays soft and gooey. It tastes like, imagine the worst sausage you've ever eaten, mixed with grass clippings and pennies, and mountain men consider it a delicacy. But here's what Smith understands that others miss. Boudin isn't just food, it's medicine. The partially digested grass contains enzymes that aid digestion. The blood provides iron. The kidney fat supplies fat-soluble vitamins. The intestine casing provides collagen and protein. It's a complete nutritional package wrapped in an edible container. This is the period when mountain man food philosophy reaches its fullest expression. If it's disgusting enough, it probably won't spoil. If other men can't stomach it, you won't have to share. And if it keeps you alive, it's automatically delicious. Take prairie oysters, buffalo testicles. The name is supposed to make them sound fancy, but there's nothing fancy about slicing open a bull buffalo's scrotum and eating what you find inside, raw, while the animal is still twitching. Mountain men develop elaborate preparation rituals for prairie oysters. Some prefer them sliced thin and fried in buffalo fat. Others eat them whole and raw like enormous squishy grapes. Still others dry them into jerky for trail food. But the real connoisseurs, APA, men like Hugh Glass and Tom Fitzpatrick, eat them immediately after castrating live bulls, while the organs are still warm, while they're still functional. This isn't just about nutrition or even survival. This is about proving something, about demonstrating that you've moved so far beyond civilization that you can find pleasure in things that would make ordinary men vomit. The period also sees the perfection of mountain man coffee, a brew that would probably be classified as a controlled substance today. You start with regular coffee beans, but then you add things. Chicory root for bitterness, pine needles for vitamin C, sometimes tobacco for that extra kick of nicotine. The really adventurous add a pinch of gunpowder, claiming it improves the flavor and provides energy. Does gunpowder actually improve coffee? Probably not. Does it prove you're crazy enough to eat anything? Absolutely. But perhaps the most sophisticated development of this period is the refinement of pemmican. The basic recipe, dried meat, rendered fat, berries, dops, remains the same. But mountain men begin experimenting with variations that would impress modern food scientists. They discover that certain berries prevent the fat from going rancid, that specific drying techniques create different textures and flavors, that the ratio of meat to fat determines how long the pemmican will last in different climates. Some mountain men specialize in winter pemmican, extra fat content for cold weather survival. Others, perfect desert pemmican, less fat, more salt, designed to prevent dehydration in extreme heat. The really innovative ones create medicine pemmican, pemmican mixed with various herbs and plant materials that treat specific ailments. Willow bark pemmican for pain relief. Echinacea pemmican for immune support. even pemmican made with fermented fish oil for those long winters when fresh meat becomes impossible to find. By 1835, the mountain men have created the most sophisticated survival cuisine in human history. They've figured out how to preserve meat without refrigeration, how to pack complete nutrition into portable packages, and how to find edible calories in environments that appear completely barren. But more importantly, they've created a culture where dietary courage determines social status, where the ability to eat horrible things becomes a mark of honor, where men compete not just in hunting or fighting, but in consuming things that would horrify their mothers. This is when mountain man cuisine becomes art. Twisted, revolting art, but art nonetheless. And the canvas they're painting on? Their own digestive systems. The 1840s. This is when mountain man cuisine reaches its most creative and most desperate. Extremes. The beaver are nearly extinct, competition is vicious, and men are pushing into territories where normal food simply doesn't exist, where survival becomes an art form and starvation becomes a teacher. Tom Fitzpatrick, broken hand, they called him, after a rifle explosion mangled his fingers, leads a brigade through the Utah desert in the summer of 1842. 12 men, 47 days without resupply, crossing a landscape that looks like the surface of Mars, and Fitzpatrick discovers something that changes everything. Ant larvae, mixed with juniper berries, creates a paste that numbs hunger for hours. Now think about this. Fitzpatrick isn't some desperate greenhorn eating bugs because he doesn't know better. This is one of the most experienced mountain men alive, a man who's survived 20 years in the wilderness, and he's perfecting recipes using insects. His men learn to identify which species of grasshopper taste nutty when roasted, versus those that induce violent vomiting. They discover that cricket flour, yes, flour made from ground crickets, can stretch their small supply of grain for weeks. They figure out that certain beetle larvae, when properly prepared, taste almost exactly like bacon. Almost. But the real breakthrough comes when one of Fitzpatrick's men, a French voyageur named Baptiste, starts experimenting with what they call rock tripe. This is lichen, fungus growing on stones. It looks like dried seaweed and tastes like moldy leather soaked in urine, and it saves their lives. Rock tripe contains just enough carbohydrates and minerals to keep a human heart beating. Not thriving, just beating. Baptiste develops a preparation method that becomes legendary. Scrape the lichen off rocks, boil it 3 times to remove the bitter compounds, then mash it into a paste with water and whatever fat you can find. The result tastes like eating wet cardboard mixed with dirt, but it keeps you alive. The winter of 1843 enters mountain man legend as the time Hugh Glass, already famous for surviving a grizzly bear attack that left him crawling 200 miles with a broken leg, proves that human beings can survive on almost nothing if they're stubborn enough. Glass leads 12 men into the Wind River Range just as an early blizzard traps them for 3 months. 3 months, with enough food for maybe 2 weeks. And Glass doesn't just keep them alive, he keeps them functional. Their diet consists entirely of what Glass calls his winter menu. Rock tripe scraped from stones and boiled into paste, pine needles brewed into tea that tastes like turpentine but prevents scurvy, the inner bark of trees, which contains enough sugar to provide calories but takes hours of chewing to digest, and mice, lots of mice. Glass develops an entire philosophy around mouse cuisine. Field mice are better than house mice because they eat seeds and grains. Mice caught in the morning taste better than mice caught at night because their stomachs are full of food, and you eat the whole mouse, bones, organs, everything, because waste is death. Glass's men survive that winter, all 12 of them. They emerge from the mountains in the spring looking like skeletons, but they're alive and functional, and they've proven something profound about human adaptability. But the real heroes of this period are the Native American women married to mountain men. These women become the bridge between indigenous survival knowledge and American determination. They know secrets passed down through generations, secrets that keep their husbands alive when everything else fails. Maria Yellowleaf, wife of Trader William Bent, saves an entire brigade from starvation by teaching them the art of fermentation. She shows them how to bury fish heads in underground pits, cover them with rocks, and let them rot for exactly 37 days until they liquefy into paste. This paste, and I'm not going to lie, it smells like death mixed with vomit, contains concentrated protein and fats that can sustain a man for days. More importantly, the fermentation process creates nutrients that aren't present in fresh fish, vitamins and enzymes that prevent the muscle wasting that kills starving men. Maria's other contribution becomes legendary: blood balls. These are exactly what they sound like: coagulated blood, mixed with bone marrow and dried berries, formed into balls and dried until they achieve the consistency of rocks. Blood balls can be stored for months without spoiling. They're packed with iron, protein, and vitamins, and they taste like eating pennies mixed with sawdust. But when you're starving, they taste like life itself. The late 1840s also see the development of what mountain men call painter meat, mountain lion. And mountain lion presents unique challenges. First, it's tough. Tougher than boot leather, tougher than rawhide. Men regularly break teeth trying to chew properly prepared mountain lion meat. Second, it's gamey. Not just a little gamey, spectacularly, overwhelmingly gamey. It tastes like what you'd imagine a predator would taste like if that predator had been rolling in its own waste for weeks. But mountain men figure out the solution: water curing. You soak mountain lion meat in running stream water for 3 days, changing the location every few hours. The flowing water draws out the compounds that make the meat taste like concentrated wildness. After 3 days, painter meat becomes edible. Still tough, still requiring careful chewing, but no longer capable of making strong men weep with disgust. Some mountain men become true artists of painter meat preparation. They develop marinades using wild garlic and pine needles. They perfect smoking techniques that break down the tough fibers. They even create painter meat pemmican, though this requires grinding the meat so fine it resembles sawdust. But perhaps the most important development of this period is the crystallization of what becomes the mountain man motto: meat's meat, and a man's got to eat. This isn't just about being practical. This is about rejecting the arbitrary distinctions that civilization creates between acceptable and unacceptable food. Horse meat? Meat's meat. Dog meat? Meat's meat. Skunk meat? Well, if you can get past the smell, the motto represents a fundamental philosophical shift. These men have moved beyond cultural taboos, beyond religious restrictions, beyond social conditioning. They've reached a state of pure pragmatism where survival trumps everything else. And this philosophy gets tested in the most extreme ways possible. The winter of 1847 produces what mountain men call the leather season. Multiple brigades, trapped by early snows, exhaust their food supplies and begin eating their equipment. Moccasins boiled into glue soup, saddles cut into strips and chewed like jerky. Even gun cases and powder horns get consumed when nothing else remains. The technique for preparing leather becomes a survival skill, as crucial as building fires or setting traps. You cut the leather into small strips to maximize surface area. You boil it for hours until it breaks down into gelatin. You season it with whatever salt or herbs you can find to mask the taste of tanning chemicals. Properly prepared, a leather moccasin provides enough nutrition to keep a man alive for 3 days. It tastes like chewing on a boot that's been soaked in chemicals, but it keeps the heart beating. Some men become specialists in leather preparation. They know which types of leather are most nutritious, which tanning processes create the least toxic results, which cuts of leather provide the most calories per ounce. And here's the remarkable thing. They don't just survive these experiences. They learn from them. They develop preferences. Hugh Glass actually claims to prefer elk hide moccasins over deer hide because elk leather has a meatier flavor. These men are becoming connoisseurs of desperation. By the end of the 1840s, mountain man cuisine has evolved into something unprecedented in human history. A survival system so sophisticated, so adaptable, so completely divorced from normal human food preferences that it represents a new form of human evolution. These men have literally trained their bodies and minds to extract nutrition from anything organic. They've overcome millions of years of evolutionary programming that tells humans what's safe to eat and what isn't. They've become the ultimate omnivores, and their next challenge will test even these incredible adaptations. Between 1825 and 1840, the annual rendezvous becomes something unprecedented in American history, a theater of gastronomic horror where dietary courage determines social hierarchy, trading privileges, and ultimately, who gets rich and who goes home broke. William Sublette controls the supply wagons. Think about the power this gives him. Sublette deliberately limits civilized food to drive prices through the roof. A single pound of coffee, £1, costs $20 in beaver pelts. That's roughly $1,000 in today's money. For coffee, a lemon, $50 in pelts, pickled eggs. Men mortgage their future earnings for a single jar. White flour, more valuable than gold, literally. Sublette is creating an economy where dietary desperation drives commerce. But here's the genius of the system. Men who can survive on free prairie oysters and fermented mare's milk maintain their independence. They can negotiate from strength. They're not desperate for civilized food, so they're not at Sublette's mercy. The mountain men who've truly adapted to wilderness cuisine become the wealthy ones. The ones still craving bread and sugar, they go home broke. This creates what you might call an evolutionary pressure toward iron stomachs. The men with the strongest digestive systems literally outcompete those with civilized food preferences. The 1837 rendezvous on the Green River becomes legendary. 2,000 participants gather for what they call the Iron Belly Olympics, competitions that would horrify modern health inspectors and fascinate psychologists. The Grand Championship involves consuming what they call the Devil's Breakfast, a mixture designed to test every aspect of gastronomic courage. Rattlesnake venom mixed with whiskey, raw mountain lion heart, still warm from the kill, and the dreaded son-of-a-gun stew. Let me describe son-of-a-gun stew, because this recipe becomes the ultimate test of mountain man manhood. You take a buffalo calf, has to be young, because older animals are too tough. You remove every organ, every single one, heart, liver, kidneys, lungs, brain, intestines, stomach, even the reproductive organs. Then, and this is the crucial part, you include the contents of the stomach, whatever that calf was eating when you killed it. Grass, weeds, flowers, whatever. You throw it all into one pot with water and salt and boil it until everything breaks down into an indistinguishable mass. The result looks like thick brown soup with chunks of unidentifiable matter floating in it. It smells like a barnyard mixed with a slaughterhouse. And it tastes like, well, imagine if you could concentrate the essence of animal into liquid form. But here's what's brilliant about son-of-a-gun stew. It's nutritionally perfect. The organ meats provide every vitamin and mineral a human needs. The stomach contents add fiber and enzymes. The long cooking process makes everything digestible. Mountain men claim that a bowl of son-of-a-gun stew can sustain a man for a week of hard travel. And they're probably right. The Iron Belly competition of 1837 draws champion eaters from across the American West. Joe Meek, fresh from his rattlesnake-eating triumph, faces off against Hugh Glass, Jim Beckwourth, and a Crow warrior known only as Iron Gut. The rules are simple. Each contestant must consume one full portion of Devil's Breakfast without vomiting, fainting, or refusing to continue. The last man standing wins exclusive trading rights to the Three Forks region, CZ, the richest beaver territory in North America. We're talking about millions of dollars in modern money riding on who can keep down the most revolting meal ever conceived. Meek starts strong, downing the rattlesnake venom mixture like it's medicinal whiskey. Glass methodically chews through the raw mountain lion heart, his face showing no emotion. Beckworth approaches, the son of a gun stew, with the concentration of a man defusing a bomb. Iron Gut, this crow warrior who's become legendary for eating things that would kill white men, treats the entire competition like a casual meal. He's not just eating this stuff, he's enjoying it, making satisfied sounds, asking for seconds. The crowd is horrified and amazed in equal measure. These men are watching human beings voluntarily consume things that violate every instinct of self-preservation. But the economic implications go far beyond entertainment. Accepting food from Native American chiefs becomes a crucial diplomatic tool. When Blackfoot Chief Heavy Runner offers visiting traders his special dog meat soup, refusing isn't just rude. It means losing access to the entire Blackfoot territory. And Heavy Runner's dog meat soup is challenging. He selects old dogs, claims they're more flavorful, boils them with wild turnips and bitter herbs, serves the mixture hot enough to burn your tongue, claiming, the heat improves the medicine. The soup tastes like what you'd expect dog meat to taste like if that dog had been eating garbage and rolling in mud. But consuming it with apparent pleasure opens up trading relationships worth fortunes. Smart mountain men learn to read the diplomatic implications of different foods. Mexican traders introduce chili preserved meats that burn so intensely men weep while eating, but the capsaicin prevents spoilage in desert heat. Learning to handle these burning foods becomes essential for anyone wanting to trade in the Southwest. The French-Canadian brigades share their ultimate survival food, roubabou. This is their masterpiece of wilderness cuisine. ISQs, pemmican, flour, and whatever dead things they find along the trail, fermented together until it achieves the consistency of paste and smells like death itself. Properly aged roubabou can sustain men for weeks. It's nutritionally complete, never spoils, and requires no preparation. You just eat it cold, straight from the container, trying not to think about what those chunks of unidentifiable matter might be. But here's the crucial business insight. Roubabou becomes a trade good. Men who can manufacture high-quality roubabou develop steady customers among those who haven't mastered the recipe. It's like medieval ale brewing, but with fermented meat paste. The rendezvous economy creates specialists, men who focus on pemmican production, others who perfect jerky techniques. Some become experts in organ meat preservation. The most successful traders diversify. They can produce any type of wilderness food their customers might need. This specialization leads to quality improvements that would impress modern food scientists. Different pemmican recipes for different climates and uses, jerky preparations that maximize protein density, organ meat techniques that preserve maximum nutrition while minimizing spoilage. The 1838 Rendezvous sees the introduction of what traders call luxury wilderness foods, items that taste better than survival rations but still meet the preservation requirements of frontier life. Beaver tail pâté, prepared by a French trader who claims he learned the technique in Paris. It tastes like fishy liver mousse and costs $20 per pound, but mountain men buy it for special occasions. Buffalo tongue jerky, prepared using secret spice mixtures brought up from Santa Fe. Still jerky, still requiring careful chewing, but with flavors that remind men of civilization without making them soft. Even mountain oyster sauce, a condiment made from fermented prairie oysters that can make almost any wilderness meat taste better, or at least taste different. But the ultimate luxury item becomes coffee substitute supreme, a mixture of roasted acorns, pine nuts, and chicory root that actually tastes somewhat like real coffee. At $30 per pound, it's more expensive than actual coffee, but it can be produced locally and doesn't require supply wagons from Street Louis. By 1840, the Rendezvous has created a complete alternative economy based on extreme cuisine. Men who've mastered wilderness food production can become wealthy without ever trapping a single beaver. But more importantly, they've created a culture where gastronomic courage becomes social currency, where the ability to eat horrible things translates directly into respect, power, and money. These men have weaponized their digestive systems, and their next challenge will test even these incredible adaptations. The 1850s bring ecological collapse. The beaver are gone, over-harvested to near extinction. Buffalo herds are being systematically destroyed by hide hunters. Competing brigades have stripped entire valleys of everything edible, and desperate men are about to discover just how far human beings can fall when survival is the only law that matters. The winter of 1856 enters mountain man legend as the starving time. Jim Beckwourth, that mulatto mountain man who became a Crow chief and lived to tell impossible tales, leads a party of 23 men into the Sangre de Cristo Mountains just as the worst. Blizzard in recorded history traps them for 53 days. 53 days, with enough food for maybe a week. Beckwourth documents their descent into dietary desperation with the methodical precision of a scientist studying human adaptation. First, they eat their horses. All of them, including Beckwourth's prized stallion that cost him 3 years' earnings. Horse meat is tough and gamey, but it's meat. Then they eat their leather goods. Saddles, bridles, moccasins, gun cases, everything gets cut into strips and boiled into what they call glue soup. It tastes like chewing on boots soaked in chemicals, but it contains enough protein and gelatin to keep hearts beating. By day 20, they're hunting wolves and coyotes with their last ammunition. Wolf meat is stringy and bitter, tasting like concentrated wildness, but wolves are smart enough to find food sources humans miss. A wolf's stomach often contains partially digested meat that can be cleaned and eaten. Coyote is worse. Coyotes eat anything: carrion, insects, garbage, their own waste. Coyote meat tastes like all of those things combined. But meat is meat, and men who are starving can't afford preferences. Day 30 brings them to ravens. These scavenger birds are tough and bitter, requiring hours of cooking to make them chewable. But ravens are survivors. They know where to find food even in the worst conditions. And desperate men learn from desperate birds. By day 40 they're eating mice. Field mice caught in improvised traps, roasted whole over tiny fires they can barely afford to build. A single mouse provides maybe 50 calories, but 50 calories is the difference between life and death. Beckwourth himself documents eating his own buckskin shirt. He cuts it into strips, chews each piece for hours to extract any remaining nutrition from the hide and whatever animal fat might have been used in the tanning process. He describes the taste as leather soaked in despair. But they survive. All 23 men. They emerge from those mountains in spring looking like walking skeletons, but they're alive and functional, and they've proven something terrifying about human adaptability. The 1840s also produce whispered stories that cast a dark shadow over mountain man culture. The Donner Party disaster of 1846 changes everything. Suddenly there are things that even mountain men don't talk about directly, lines that even the most desperate men hesitate to cross. Several documented accounts describe what happens when all other food sources fail. When the leather is gone, the mice are extinct. The bark has been stripped from every tree. When men start drawing lots for what they euphemistically call the ultimate necessity, Joe Walker's brigade discovers something that haunts their dreams for years afterward. Certain mushrooms grow on corpses, human corpses, and these mushrooms can be eaten if boiled 3 times to remove the toxins. The mushrooms cause hallucinations that last for days, but they provide enough nutrition to keep men alive. Walker himself never speaks directly about eating these mushrooms, but his journal contains cryptic references to the food that dreams and meals that require forgiveness. Men who survive these experiences never fully recover. They develop a haunted look, a way of staring into the distance as if they're seeing things others can't. The ecological destruction of the 1850s forces men to become scavengers of a landscape being systematically destroyed. The American Fur Company offers bounties for pelts regardless of season or quality, causing brigades to exterminate local wildlife so thoroughly that entire valleys become biological deserts. In these devastated landscapes, men learn to eat things that would horrify even veteran mountain men. They develop techniques for preparing carrion, T4, animals that died of disease or old age. They learn to identify which types of rot are safe to eat and which will kill you. Dead elk that's been frozen all winter can be safely consumed if you cut away the green parts. Deer that died of disease can be eaten if you boil the meat for hours and consume only the muscle tissue, avoiding organs that might contain concentrated toxins. Some men become specialists in carrion cuisine. They can identify by smell which dead animals are safe to eat, which parts to avoid, and how to prepare spoiled meat to maximize safety and nutrition. This knowledge comes at a psychological cost. Men who survive on carrion develop a relationship with death that civilized people can't understand. They become comfortable with decay, familiar with the stages of decomposition, capable of finding sustenance in things that represent mortality itself. Crows literally enter the vocabulary. The scavenger bird becomes so common in mountain man diet that eating crow enters American slang as a metaphor for accepting humiliating defeat, because that's what eating crow feels like: defeat. Surrender to circumstances so desperate that you'll consume scavengers. Crow meat is stringy, bitter, and carries the taste of everything that crow has eaten, which includes carrion, garbage, and worse. But crows are intelligent birds. They survive when other animals can't, and desperate men learn from desperate crows where to find food in seemingly barren landscapes. The late 1850s produced what might be the most sophisticated starvation cuisine in human history. Men develop elaborate preparation techniques for foods that aren't really foods. They create preservation methods for things that shouldn't be preserved. They establish hierarchies of desperation, which disgusting foods are preferable to which other disgusting foods. Pine needle soup becomes a staple. Different types of pine needles provide different nutritional benefits. Ponderosa pine needles are high in vitamin C but taste like turpentine. White pine needles are more palatable but less nutritious. Juniper needles prevent scurvy but cause hallucinations if consumed in large quantities. Men develop preferences among tree barks. Aspen bark is sweet and contains sugars. Birch bark has a wintergreen flavor but requires extensive boiling to remove bitter compounds. Pine bark tastes like wood shavings but contains enough carbohydrates to prevent muscle wasting. The inner bark of cottonwood trees becomes a delicacy. It's sweet, relatively palatable, and provides quick energy. But cottonwood bark is also a natural laxative, requiring careful portion control to avoid dehydration. Some men become artists of bark preparation. They develop techniques for grinding bark into flour, fermenting it to improve digestibility, and combining different barks to create more complete nutrition. Grass soup enters the mountain man menu during the worst years. Not just any grass, specific types that provide maximum nutrition with minimum toxicity. Buffalo grass is sweet and contains protein. Wild rice grass provides carbohydrates. Even certain weeds become valuable food sources when properly prepared. But perhaps the most profound development of this period is the psychological adaptation required to survive on foods that violate every instinct of self-preservation. These men learn to override millions of years of evolutionary programming that tells humans what's safe to eat. They develop what you might call a philosophical relationship with hunger. They understand that disgust is a luxury they can't afford, that preference is a weakness that can kill them, that survival requires accepting whatever the landscape provides. By the end of the 1850s, the mountain men have created the ultimate survival cuisine, CA-CIS, a system so desperate, so extreme, so completely divorced from normal human food preferences that it represents a new form of human evolution. But their time is ending. Civilization is coming to the mountains, bringing with it rules and restrictions that will make their hard-won knowledge obsolete. 1860. The Transcontinental Railroad is cutting across the continent like a steel knife, bringing civilization's death sentence to mountain man culture. And men who spent decades eating with bloody hands are about to confront the ultimate challenge: sterling silver forks and china plates. Jim Bridger is 56 years old now, serving as an Army scout at Fort Laramie. This man who perfected the art of eating raw buffalo liver, who survived winters on pine bark soup and mouse meat, who could digest things that would poison normal humans, he's been invited to dinner with the commanding officer's wife. Picture this scene. The officer's dining room, complete with white tablecloth, crystal glasses, and multiple forks for different courses. Mrs. Henderson, the colonel's wife, has prepared what she considers a rustic meal appropriate for a frontier character: roast beef, mashed potatoes, and green beans. Bridger sits at the table, staring at the silverware like it's some kind of puzzle. He's forgotten how to eat like a civilized man. When the roast beef arrives, cooked, seasoned, presented on fine china, he instinctively reaches for his knife to cut off a piece and eat it raw. The shocked silence that follows becomes legendary at Fort Laramie. Mrs. Henderson nearly faints as Bridger absent-mindedly chews raw meat, blood running down his chin just like it did 30 years ago when he learned this technique from Crow warriors. But here's the thing that nobody expected. Bridger's transformed digestive system can't handle civilized food. The cooked beef makes him violently ill. His stomach, adapted to raw meat and organ consumption, rejects the prepared meal like it's poison. Within an hour, Bridger is doubled over with cramps. The mashed potatoes, made with milk and butter, cause explosive diarrhea. The green beans trigger vomiting so severe that the post-surgeon has to be called. This isn't just Bridger. Mountain men across the West are discovering that their bodies have evolved beyond civilization's capacity to feed them. Wheat bread, the foundation of civilized diet, triggers violent illness in men whose systems have adapted to meat-only consumption. Cow's milk causes days of agony in digestive systems that haven't processed dairy in decades. Hugh Glass, now in his 70s and working as a mail carrier, documents his own struggle with the transition. He tries to eat a normal meal in Street Louis, fr, soup, bread, vegetables, and ends up hospitalized for a week. His journal entry reads, "My belly has forgot how to be civilized. Cooked food sits in me like stones." Some mountain men never successfully make the transition. They continue eating raw meat, dried organs, and pemmican even when living in towns. They become curiosities, men who order raw liver in restaurants and drink their coffee black enough to dissolve horseshoes. But others discover they can exploit their notorious digestive capabilities for profit. Liver-eating Johnson, that legendary mountain man who allegedly ate the livers of 300 Crow warriors, begins performing in traveling shows. Audiences pay good money to watch a real savage consume raw organs, drink warm blood, and prepare wilderness meals that make Victorian ladies faint. Johnson's show includes eating rattlesnakes, consuming raw prairie oysters, and preparing authentic son-of-a-gun stew for horrified audiences. He charges extra for demonstrations of leather soup preparation and bark bread baking. Eastern audiences are simultaneously repulsed and fascinated by this living reminder of America's wild past. Buffalo Bill Cody hires former mountain men for his Wild West shows, where they demonstrate survival cooking techniques that health inspectors would condemn. Joe Meek, now in his 60s but still capable of consuming impossible foods, becomes a featured attraction. He skins rattlesnakes with his teeth, drinks warm blood from buffalo horns, and prepares authentic wilderness meals while telling stories of survival that sound like fiction. The audiences love it. These performances tap into something deep in the American psyche, a fascination with men who pushed human endurance beyond normal limits. But for the mountain men themselves, these performances are both profitable and heartbreaking. They're displaying skills that once meant the difference between life and death for entertainment value. The railroad brings another challenge: competition from civilized preserved foods. Canned goods, factory-made jerky, and commercial pemmican flood the market. These products are safer, more consistent, and don't require iron stomachs to consume. But the mountain men quickly discover that commercial versions of their survival foods are pale imitations. Factory jerky lacks the concentrated nutrition of properly prepared wilderness jerky. Commercial pemmican spoils faster and provides fewer calories than authentic recipes. Canned goods, while convenient, don't provide the complete nutrition that organ-based diets supply. Some mountain men become entrepreneurs, capitalizing on their knowledge to produce superior survival foods for miners, railroad workers, and other frontier professions. Kit Carson establishes a pemmican factory in Taos, producing authentic wilderness food for customers who need maximum nutrition in minimum weight. Carson's pemmican includes ingredients that commercial producers avoid: organ meats, bone marrow, blood, and specific berry combinations that prevent rancidity. His products cost more than factory alternatives but provide twice the nutrition and last 3 times longer without spoiling. Jim Beckworth opens a jerky operation in Maine, Denver, specializing in preparations that duplicate the survival foods he perfected during his starving years. His jerky includes organ meats, maintains higher fat content than commercial products, and uses smoking techniques that concentrate maximum nutrition into portable packages. But perhaps the most poignant symbol of this transition period is the final rendezvous, held at Fort Bridger in 1870. Only 47 surviving mountain men attend, the last gathering of men who lived through the golden age of wilderness survival. They share one last feast of remembered horrors: fermented fish heads that smell like death itself, boiled rawhide that tastes like chewing on chemistry experiments, grasshopper paste that crunches between their teeth like nature's gravel, pine bark bread that tastes like turpentine but carries memories of winters when it meant survival. Old Joe Meek, now 71 and one of the few survivors of the legendary 1825 rendezvous, delivers what becomes the gathering's unofficial eulogy. "We ate things that would gag a buzzard, drank things that would poison a snake, and lived through times that would kill ordinary men. We were giants, boys, giants with cast-iron stomachs and souls too stubborn to die." But even as they celebrate their past, these men understand that their knowledge is becoming obsolete. The railroad brings reliable food supplies. Telegraph lines bring rescue services. The wilderness that created them is being tamed, surveyed, and civilized. Some try to pass on their knowledge. Jim Bridger writes detailed survival manuals, documenting recipes and techniques that kept men alive in impossible circumstances. His Guide to Wilderness Survival includes precise instructions for preparing carrion, identifying edible insects, and creating nutrition from tree bark and lichen. Kit Carson establishes a survival school, teaching young Army officers the basics of wilderness cuisine, but his students struggle with even the mildest survival foods. They can't stomach raw meat, can't digest organ-based nutrition, can't overcome civilized squeamishness about eating insects or drinking blood. The mountain men watch their students fail and realize something profound. Their knowledge can't be taught. It can only be earned through desperation, necessity, and years of adaptation that literally rewires human biology. Hugh Glass, in one of his final journal entries before his death in 1873, writes, "We changed ourselves to survive in a world that no longer exists. We became something new, something that civilization can't understand or replicate. We were the bridge between the old world and the new, and now that bridge is burning behind us." The mountain men begin dying off in the 1870s and 80s, taking their knowledge with them. Their deaths are often lonely, their bodies unable to adapt back to civilized nutrition. They die of diseases that proper wilderness diet would have prevented, in hospitals that can't understand why these tough old men can't digest normal food. But their legend grows. Dime novels romanticize their adventures, focusing on their fighting and hunting skills while largely ignoring the dietary innovations that made their lifestyle possible. The reading public wants heroes who fight bears and shoot Indians, not men who eat insects and drink blood. This sanitized version of mountain man culture becomes the American myth, the American brave frontiersman conquering the wilderness through courage and marksmanship. The truth, that they conquered it by learning to eat things that would horrify civilized people, gets lost in the mythology. By 1880, the last of the true mountain men are gone. With them dies the most sophisticated survival cuisine in human history, knowledge that took decades to accumulate and required literal physical evolution to master. But their legacy lives on in ways they never expected. The Smine, the mountain men, vanish into history, but their culinary courage echoes through every survival story that follows. Their shadow falls across places they never imagined, influences people they never met, and shapes survival techniques still being used today. Ernest Shackleton is planning his Antarctic expedition in 1914 when he discovers a collection of mountain man journals in a London library. These detailed accounts of survival eating fascinate him. Here are men who lived for months on diets that should have killed them, who maintained strength and morale while consuming foods that would horrify naval officers. Shackleton studies their techniques with scientific precision. The mountain men's emphasis on organ meats and animal fats mirrors what his expedition will find in Antarctica: seal blubber and penguin meat that provide concentrated calories in extreme cold. Their methods for overcoming psychological barriers to disgusting food become crucial when Shackleton's men face starvation on the ice. The famous account of Shackleton's crew eating seal blubber raw, drinking penguin oil, and consuming every part of every animal they kill, this isn't improvisation. This is mountain man technique adapted to polar conditions. Frank Wild, Shackleton's second in command, writes in his journal, "We eat as the American mountain men ate, everything, without question, without pause. The liver first, while warm, the blood mixed with snow, the organs that civilized men discard. We have learned from men who lived like wolves." World War II brings mountain man knowledge back to military relevance. American survival training incorporates principles that Jim Bridger and Hugh Glass perfected a century earlier: the psychological techniques for overcoming disgust, the knowledge that insects provide more complete protein than muscle meat, and the vital lesson that squeamishness kills faster than poison. Military survival manuals quote mountain man techniques almost verbatim. Meat is meat, and a man must eat becomes official doctrine. Soldiers learn to prepare grasshopper flour, identify edible tree bark, and consume organ meats that provide maximum nutrition in minimum weight. But the military versions are sanitized, civilized. Modern soldiers learn to eat insects, but they're taught to cook them thoroughly and season them heavily. They learn organ meat consumption, but always prepared and presented in ways that minimize psychological trauma. The mountain men would have laughed at such squeamishness. They ate insects raw, organs warm from the kill, and never worried about seasoning or presentation when survival was at stake. Korean War veterans bring back stories that echo mountain man experiences. Prisoners of war survive on diets that would kill unprepared men: grass soup, tree bark, bread, insects, and carrion. The POWs who survive are often those who can overcome civilized food prejudices most completely. Lieutenant Colonel James Fletcher, captured during the Chinese offensive, documents eating foods that mirror mountain man survival techniques. We learned to see maggots as protein, to drink our own urine when water was scarce, to chew leather when nothing else remained. The men who survived were those who could become uncivilized fastest. Modern survival schools attempt to teach sanitized versions of mountain man wisdom. Students learn to identify edible insects, prepare tree bark flour, and overcome basic food prejudices. But these courses rarely develop the true iron stomach that mountain man survival required. Television survival shows like Man vs. Wild and Survivor present watered-down versions of mountain man techniques. Bear Grylls drinks his own urine and eats raw insects while cameras roll, but he does it for days, not months. He eats disgusting things as stunts, not as daily survival. The shows invariably include disclaimers, "Do not attempt at home," and "performed by trained professionals." The mountain men would find this hilarious. They lived this way for decades without training, professionals, or safety nets. But perhaps the most ironic development is the transformation of mountain man survival foods into trendy health products. Pemmican becomes a superfood marketed to athletes as the original energy bar. Companies charge premium prices for products that mountain men ate from desperation. Modern pemmican costs $20 per pound and comes in flavors like Berry Blast and chocolate chip. It's manufactured in sterile facilities, tested for purity, and guaranteed free of the insects, hair, and mysterious green chunks that gave authentic pemmican its distinctive texture. Jerky generates billions in annual sales, marketed as high-protein snacks for health-conscious consumers, but commercial jerky bears little resemblance to mountain man preparations. It's made from prime cuts, heavily seasoned, and carefully preserved to eliminate any hint of the gamey, tough, sometimes partially spoiled meat that mountain men considered normal. Organ meats experience a renaissance in haute cuisine restaurants. Chefs charge hundreds of dollars for preparations of liver, heart, and kidneys that mountain men ate raw from necessity. These nose-to-tail restaurants present organ consumption as sophisticated dining, complete with wine pairings and artistic presentations. The mountain men would be amazed to see wealthy urbanites paying premium prices to eat the foods they consumed because they had no choice. Bone broth becomes a health trend, with companies marketing concentrated animal bone extracts as miracle nutrition. Mountain men cracked bones and sucked marrow as routine survival practice, not as wellness therapy. Even grasshopper flour enters the health food market, marketed as sustainable protein for environmentally conscious consumers. Companies produce cricket protein bars, mealworm pasta, and ant-based supplements for people who want to reduce their environmental footprint. But these modern insect foods are carefully processed, thoroughly cooked, and heavily flavored to eliminate any resemblance to eating actual bugs. Mountain men ate grasshoppers raw, crunching through legs and wings without seasoning or preparation. The deeper legacy runs through modern prepper culture. Survivalists stockpile food supplies and study techniques that echo mountain man practices, but usually in sanitized, civilized forms. They store freeze-dried meals instead of learning to eat carrion. They stock vitamin supplements instead of learning to consume organ meats. Most preppers want to maintain civilized nutrition during uncivilized times. The mountain men understood something more profound, that true survival might require abandoning civilization entirely, including civilized ideas about food. Modern military training incorporates psychological techniques developed from mountain man experiences. Soldiers learn to overcome food prejudices through gradual exposure, starting with slightly unusual foods and working up to insects and organ meats. But this training rarely achieves the complete transformation that mountain men underwent. The Special Forces survival schools come closest to mountain man training. Elite soldiers learn to eat anything, digest anything, and laugh about it afterward. But even these programs include safety measures and medical oversight that mountain men never had. Perhaps the most profound modern echo of mountain man influence appears in post-apocalyptic fiction. Every zombie movie, every nuclear war novel, every climate change disaster story includes characters who learn to eat things that would horrify their previous selves. These fictional survivors almost always follow the mountain man progression. They hop, first eating their pets and horses, then leather goods and tree bark, finally reaching psychological states where they can consume anything if survival depends on it. The Walking Dead television series features characters who evolve from squeamish suburbanites into people who eat dog food, raw meat, and whatever they can find without question. This transformation mirrors the mountain man experience almost exactly. Necessity, overcoming disgust, survival trumping preference. But fiction rarely captures the complete psychological transformation that mountain man life required. Fictional characters usually retain their essential humanity, their civilized core. They eat horrible things reluctantly, maintaining their disgust even as they swallow. The mountain men went further. They learned to find pleasure in foods that should disgust humans. They developed genuine preferences among survival foods. They became connoisseurs of desperation. Modern psychology studies extreme survival situations, trying to understand how some people adapt while others don't. Researchers document cases of people who survive disasters by eating foods that kill others, but they usually frame this as trauma response rather than evolution. The mountain men would disagree. They didn't see their dietary adaptations as trauma. They saw them as liberation. Liberation from civilized weakness, from artificial constraints, from the luxury of preferences they couldn't afford. Their greatest gift to history wasn't their exploration of unknown territories or their role in westward expansion. It was proof that human beings can adapt to absolutely anything if freedom is the reward. That the human spirit can digest not just any food, but any hardship, any challenge, any obstacle between them and independence. The mountain men proved that disgust is learned, that preference is luxury, and that somewhere within every civilized human lurks a creature capable of eating anything, enduring anything, and laughing about it afterward. Their shadow falls across every modern survival story, every tale of human endurance, every account of people who chose freedom over comfort so completely that they redesigned their own biology through sheer willpower. In every person who chooses the difficult path over the easy one, who values independence over security, who believes that survival is more important than dignity, in all of these, the mountain men live on. They transformed American mythology forever, creating an archetype of humans who refuse to let civilization define their limits, and their most lasting contribution to human knowledge, the understanding that we can digest anything, food, hardship, or circumstance, if we're hungry enough for freedom.